Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Chad Baker, Chair of the Democratic Party of York County. And we have this streaming a couple different ways tonight. I know there's a few people joining us here on Zoom. We have a few others, I think, that are joining us through our YouTube Live page. So we thank you for joining us this evening to learn a little bit more about write-in campaigns. We're expecting a few other folks, so we're gonna, as we go through, if other folks log on, we will make sure that they have access as well. And just to let everyone know, we are recording this as well, and we will be posting this a link for this for everyone who participated and signed up. You'll get a link after tonight. So as we go through, if you have questions, if you could put them in the chat, that would be fantastic. That would allow us then to kind of keep moving along and kind of chat, get your questions as we go. So obviously, the main reason we're here tonight is to talk about write-in campaigns. We're at that stage in the election where petitioning is finished, and we know that literally when you're looking at um, the election ahead of us, there's hundreds of positions that are on the ballot this year, whether it's township, whether it's borough, whether it's city, whether it's state. We know that county, we know that there's just a ton of openings on the ballot. And in a lot of cases, especially when it comes to the municipal, the township, the borough races, a lot of those elections sometimes go without candidates from either party. And it's really easy for someone who does a write-in campaign to be successful in moving forward if they are the only one being written in. So that's what we're trying to do here, is to give you a little bit of information on how to do the write-in process, what's needed, some kind of key takeaway points to remember as you're running that kind of campaign. And hopefully, you're successful at the end of the day with a write-in campaign if you are moving forward that way. So there's three things we're going to do tonight. One, we're going to talk about how to create a plan in getting on the ballot for the write-in. We'll talk a little bit about building your team, kind of what the expectations are there and what folks should be thinking about when looking for volunteers. And then third, obviously, is to get on the ballot. So let's start off with the plan. Key thing to remember for any write-in race is that these are races that in order to get on the ballot for November, you need to have the same number of votes as you would have needed to be successful if you were petitioning. So, for example, municipal and school board races, most of those races required 10 signatures to get onto the primary ballot. So, in order to be considered as a write-in candidate, you need to have at least a minimum of 10 10 write-in votes in order to get on the ballot. For a lot of larger cities, larger districts, 100 might be necessary. For most countywide races, it's 250 is the minimum needed. So that is your first initial target, is to focus on how do I get 10 people to write me in a township supervisor race? How do I get 250 people to write me in a county commissioner race? Whatever it is that you're looking to run for, the first thing is to get an idea if they the first thing you need to do is to get an idea of exactly how many petition signatures were necessary to begin with. And the first question I see is, does a person have to pay a registration fee like when they petition? As far as I know, you do not. It is literally just you're written in. If you're successful, if you have the highest number of write-in votes, you are the candidate. So there should not be a registration fee. That may vary from county to county. As far as I know, though, most, if not all counties, are not going to require that. So the next thing that we say is, and we say this a lot of times when it comes to petitioning as well, the minimum number is not enough. So when we do petitioning, a lot of times, say for a school board race, we say you need 10 signatures. And we say get 2 to 3 times as many signatures as you do as the minimum number required. very simply because we want to make sure that there aren't any challenges. Well, in a write-in campaign, what we want to see happen is we want to make sure that if you're doing a write-in campaign and maybe someone else is doing a write-in campaign for the same spot, you ultimately want to get the most write-in votes. And this is where it becomes tricky. There's not really a set way of figuring out how many write-in votes someone's going to get. We can figure out what the win totals are for an overall election and how many votes you need to try to get to that point. But kind of having an unknown of whether or not there are other write-in candidates running for that same spot, if they're out campaigning, what kind of effort they're putting into it. There's a lot of unknowns when it comes to write-ins. So we do recommend that you try to get as many write-in votes as you possibly can. Again, we try to give you the benchmark of 2 to 3 times more. In a municipal race, if you're running for, say, a township auditor position, and you only need to get 10 votes to be the minimum for that race, if you get 30 votes as a write-in, there's probably a pretty good chance that someone else is not going to be out there campaigning to get 30 votes for a write-in campaign. The reality is, again, we just don't know. So make your goal 30, aim for 60, try to get 180, who knows? And that is going to be important as you move forward to kind of figuring out what goal you want to have, and trying to hit that target goal. So there's another question: if a person spells the name incorrectly, but it clearly looks like the name for the write-in, what happens? We're actually going to talk about that in just a couple minutes. So if we don't answer that question, remind us, and we'll come back to that here at that point in time. Same when we were talking about minimums for races, we talking about school board races. School board is very tricky. And it is one of the races, I would say, most often we try to tell folks, if you're going to do a write-in, it's going to be really, really difficult, especially if there are people cross-filed in those races. You might look at that list and say, okay, there are 5 spots on the school board, and there's only 3 Democrats running, and the rest are Republicans, but there are Republicans cross-filed. Well, you're going to have to try to overcome that number of Republicans to get your write-in in place. That's going to be very, very difficult because obviously their name's on the ballot. Individuals are more likely to check the box next to a name than they are to check a box and write your name in as a write-in. So we often say, if you're looking at school board races, look at ones where there may be open seats on both sides. So if there are 5 people, if there's 5 spots on the ballot, there's only 4 people running. There's no one on the other side cross-filed, and there's an open spot on the Democratic side. That's when we would say run your write-in campaign. And again, that is where you might need 30, 40, 50 votes, or if there's someone else running, you might need hundreds of votes as a write-in to be successful. Kind of all comes down to how competitive that race may be as a write-in. And again, that's one of those factors we just can't, we just don't know unless we know someone else is running. For city races, as we talked about earlier, you need 100 for most city races. Again, 200 to 300 write-ins for those city races is probably a fair estimate of what could get you across the finish line and be successful as a write-in candidate. Same thing with county races, 2 to 3 times as many, so 500 to 750 for open county seats as well. Again, you need to keep in mind 2 things. As a write-in candidate, again, you need to get the most number of write-in votes on election day, period. If you decide to run for one of these races, you may have competition from Democrats. You could potentially have competition from Republicans as well. Republicans will often run write-in campaigns if there's no one running on the Democratic ticket, so that they can try to shore up that they win both the Republican and the Democratic nomination. Even in non-cross-filed races, they can do that. And if they do that and they're successful, then their name is on both ballots in November, and they're pretty much walking straight in. So that's why we say you really need to put some work into writing campaigns. It's not as simple as just telling 10 people or 100 or 250 people, write my name in. You want to make sure that you're doing some work to get your name out there. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second. There's a question about, is there a way one can tell who the Democrats are on the ballot cross-filing? And that's a great question. If your county party does not have that information readily available, you can, if you have access to Vote Builder, you can check that against Vote Builder. But typically the county party can provide that information to you. All you would need to do is reach out and ask, in this particular race, who's a Democrat, who's not a Democrat. I know, for example, we have our list here in York County that we're working with that is, we're going through and figuring that out ahead of time so that we know where there's openings, who's an actual Democrat, who's an actual Republican, and if there's openings in that sense as well. So I would say if you don't know, connect with your county party. If your county party is not available to do that, you can reach out to your Board of Elections. They are not obligated to tell you that information, though. And, you can also reach out to the state party as well. They potentially can look that information up in the voter system as well. Okay, so let's talk about building your team. This is where we now know what the minimums are. We now know that you want to kind of exceed those minimums to try to get in as a write-in candidate. So this is where the work's going to come in. So first thing we recommend is to come up with some kind of, whether it's a postcard, a rack card, a handout, something that actually shows what the position is on the ballot and shows your name clearly written so that individuals can see how to spell your name. It's important that this is in the hands of voters that you're asking to write your name in, because again, they can take this information into the polls with them. As we're going to talk about here in a second, if they're doing mail-in balloting, if they have something in front of them that has the exact name, exactly how it is to be written, that is going to lead to more success than not. So you want to have that in front of them so individuals can basically just copy your name right into that position. And we use the example here of the supervisor. They do need to fill in the dot. So you can see that here. So you're going to want to do that on anything that you do. And you're going to want to have the name clearly spelled out so that individuals can see this is how it should be written on the ballot. You're going to want to knock doors. And that comes with, having those materials to be able to go to doors and hand it to voters and say, I am a Democrat running for county or for the, say, township supervisor. I would like you to write me in. There's no one running, and I'd like to be the supervisor for reasons X, Y, and Z. And this will, get your name in front of people. You can leave that material with them, tell them they can take that along with them when they vote, or they can have it in front of them, obviously, if they're voting by mail. But to take that with them and use that as the guide for how to write their name in. Great question about the stickers. It is highly advised not to use stickers. And that is because in a lot of the scanners that are used in many of the counties, it may not pick up that scanned sticker, or it may, depending on how the sticker is put on, it could potentially jam up the scanner. So it is advised to have the individual write the name in clearly, legibly, so that there's no issue at the scanner portion of the ballot. But we do know there are folks that will still use stickers. We advise against it. Use them at your own risk if you decide to go that direction. But as with the door knocking, that's another thing that you can reach out to your county parties. You can get walk lists of individuals that are in that particular district. So in that township, in that school district, Obviously, if you're running for a county position, they can give you doors to knock in the county. But you also want to have folks that can help with that as well. If you've got a team of volunteers that are willing to help you, or friends that would go out, a couple weekends and knock doors with you. Again, it's important to get that information into people's hands. And it's also effective, even if you leave that handout behind that says, I'm running for this as a write-in, please write me in. People will still take that to the polls with them. So as I mentioned, don't forget the mail-in vote. Obviously, mail-in ballots go out, earlier than election day. They go out sometimes several weeks ahead of time. That sometimes it depends on what county you're from. They might go out different times. They might go out a month early or a month and a half early. So know kind of when that mail-in ballot's going to hit mailboxes. You could get that information by contacting the Board of Elections. They should give you an idea of when mail-in ballots are going to be mailed, or even if they can give you just a rough idea. And that would be the time when you want to start making sure that if you're going to send any postcards, or you're going to knock on doors, or you're going to spend any time trying to convince people to write your name in, that would be the time that you want to try to get to those voters. Because if they are voting by mail, you want to make sure that information is in front of them before they fill out their ballot and send it back. Again, this is another thing that most county parties can provide this information to you. The state party typically will take voter information of who's requested mail-in ballots. They will input it into Vote Builder, the database system, and most counties should be able to pull that information and provide that to an individual who's looking to run as a write-in. That is all dependent, again, on whether the state party gets that information put in a timely manner, as well as if the county is getting that information into the system in a timely manner as well. We hope that in both cases, we're getting that information updated as soon as it's available. But there may be some lag time as well. So as best you can, try to get a list of people that are going to be voting by mail, and making sure that you're outreaching to them first. If you know a voter is going to be voting in person, or someone that traditionally votes in person, you can always hit them a little bit later. But you definitely want to make sure you hit these mail-in voters first, because they are going to be, in many cases, probably getting their ballot, filling it out, and returning it in a short window of time. Poll volunteers. This is really critical. So on election day, you and other volunteers in the district that you're running should be outside the polls handing out information. Again, this is where you can say to voters as they're going in the door, I'm thinking I want to be the township supervisor. I'd like you to write my name in. Here's a handout specifically on how to do that. It includes the position I want to run for. It includes my name. If you wouldn't mind, putting that information in, that would be fantastic. We would appreciate that, or I would appreciate that. As it says, no matter the size of the race, be sure to coordinate with other candidates and your local party as well. You may have other candidates that are in competitive races, or that might just be out at the polls, greeting people as they're coming in. They may be willing to work with you, or they may have volunteers that may be out at those polls already that would be willing to hand out materials for you as well. So having that level of coordination takes a little bit of the stress off of you as a potential write-in, and it also helps obviously gather up some of those write-in votes along the way. But it is important to have somebody at the polls on election day, because again, even though we know that a lot of Democrats like to do mail-in ballots, that's not always the way it goes. You will have voters that are at the polls on election day. So it is important to have people at those polling places handing out your information. So let's talk a little bit about some things to remember. As we said already, you may not be the only person running a write-in campaign. So you should always plan as if somebody else is running. Whether it's a Democrat, whether it's a Republican, whether it's an independent, you should always think that somebody else might be running. So you need to always plan to try to get more votes than you need, as it says. And again, there is no target for these types of races. It is always kind of a moving target based on the fact that we just don't know how many people are going to be running write-in campaigns. And it's your function as the potential candidate to try to get out there and convince enough people to write you in over someone else who might be running as well as a write-in. So it is important to just kind of keep that in mind all along that, okay, if you think that 10 votes is going to be enough, it probably won't be. And especially, I will give you an example. There may be an area where somebody might just for fun write somebody in. We've seen that in the past as well, where people just write in names because they know those people. They just might say, oh, well, I know, Mayor Jane Smith, and I'm going to write her in for, city council. And if enough people do that, that could potentially be the winner of a write-in campaign. So you want to, kind of counter some of that as well and try to build up a big enough buffer so that you have the ability to potentially win as a write-in candidate. It is important to note this is one area where we talked earlier about do write-in candidates have to pay the registration fee like petitioners do? The answer to that is no, but write-in candidates are required to abide by campaign finance law. You should record all of your expenses and any contributions you might receive as a write-in candidate. And once a threshold of $250 has been reached, you are required to submit campaign finance reporting. So if you are doing a flyer, if you are doing a postcard, if you're doing anything like that, and you meet that threshold of the $250, you're going to be required to fill out that campaign finance reporting. Now, a lot of counties do have it that you can fill out a form that says that you're waiving that reporting because you don't think you're going to raise $250 or you're not going to expend $250. You can fill that out as a write-in candidate, but at the same time, as a write-in, you might be more likely to spend $250 if you need to make flyers or if you need to send postcards, or if you need to do anything like that. So keep that in mind. That as a write-in candidate, you will be held accountable for campaign finance reporting if you meet that threshold. Same thing abides with when it comes to a candidate that's on the ballot versus somebody who is doing a write-in campaign. When it comes to making sure that all of your signage, all of your advertising, any handouts, anything like that should have the paid for by disclaimer on it. If you are paying for it yourself, it can say paid for by the candidate. If somebody is donating money, you can put paid for by a volunteer, or you can put whatever really with that paid for by disclaimer, but you need to make sure that it's on all of your materials, because again, that is something that if you're out there and you're handing out this material and people are using it, and the other side gets a hold of it, they could potentially challenge that. You could get into some legal trouble if you don't have that on there. So it is important for you to remember to have that on, even as a write-in candidate. Even though you're not necessarily a candidate on the ballot yet at that point, you still should have that paid for by disclaimer on all of your materials. Be prepared for challenges. Voter intent, as it says, is not always grounds for accepting a write-in. And this goes back to the question earlier about names being spelled incorrectly. We have seen already where someone may have written someone's name in, and you looking at it, you can kind of tell that that's what the voter was trying to say. That's the person they were trying to write in. And we've seen that be accepted. We have seen it go the exact opposite way as well. We have seen where it's almost a close match. We've seen in races locally in our area where we've had candidates that have attempted to do write-ins, where there might be 2 or 3 letters off in a last name, but it clearly is intended to be the person that's running the write-in campaign. And we've seen the elections office throw those names out. It all comes down to the discretion, really, of your board of elections and your elections committee, your election commission in your county, as to what can be, what's going to be accepted and what's not going to be accepted. It is possible that you can challenge this legally. If a board of elections says, oh, it says Jane Smite instead of Jane Smith, we're not going to accept that, and you believe strongly that, well, that name should count because it is obviously the intent of the voter, they just misspelled it, or maybe a letter looks wrong because of handwriting, you can legally pursue getting that to count. That takes time, that takes money. And that is all dependent on whether you as an individual are willing to go that level to get the name to count. If you have enough names, obviously, and that one gets challenged and gets tossed out, that's fine. Then you're still going to win regardless. But if enough of these names are challenged, or enough of the way they're written is challenged, that is where you could potentially land yourself into getting, needing to get some legal assistance and legal advice on how to move forward. It is a costly effort. I will tell you, from a county perspective, we have worked with the state party in the past and talked about how we legally challenge these. And in many cases, the advice of the state party is, unless you are 100% certain that you can convince a judge or a magistrate that these are going to count, it is a tough uphill battle at that point. Can a candidate challenge, or a citizen challenge, or is it solely the Board of Elections? It could potentially be a voter that brings this to the attention of the Board of Elections. You do have the ability to go in and look at all of the write-in ballots. The Board of Elections should make that process open as they are reviewing those names, and they should provide a list of what those write-in names are. You could potentially raise it as a challenge, but ultimately it's the decision of the Board of Elections. Now, again, legally, you could potentially, challenge that after the fact. But again, you have to have a pretty good, you have to have pretty strong confidence that you can potentially convince, a judge that this should be counted. So, typically it's the Board of Elections that makes that decision, but you could also potentially lobby the Board of Elections. There should be a period of time after the votes are counted, after the write-ins are decided, that you can present a case to the Board of Elections that, write-in votes 102, 403, and 9 are not, shouldn't count. So that can be done. But again, typically most Board of Elections are going to tell you their decision is kind of the final decision overall. That's, having said that, what we would recommend ahead of time is, as a write-in candidate, you should send a letter to the Board of Elections, a written request for the accumulation of write-in votes. So you are asking for them, you're asking to see the list, and you're asking to review that list ahead of time. As it says, there's no official form for this. This is just a letter that the candidate can provide to their Board of Elections, stating the race that they're running for and the list of the various names and spellings they would like to have counted for them. So again, if it's Jane Smith, she knows that she talked to somebody and said, "Oh, I missed the M in Smith." She can then put that on her list and provide that to the Board of Elections and ask them to consider that spelling. Or if it's, Becky Smith, and, everyone else has been writing Rebecca, but somebody wrote Becky, Obviously, that could be considered. So you want to include any nicknames that might be included, any common misspellings of a last name that you might be familiar with. Especially if you have a long last name or a challenging last name. I keep using Smith. That's not a challenging last name, but if you have, a longer name or a weird spelling of a last name or something that could be misconstrued when someone's writing it out, you would want to provide that list to the board of elections, and go from there. So the question: what about if you have two? I assume you mean two last names, or two. Okay, two last names. Um, Again, you would want to provide it. You want to make sure that in the materials that you have handing out, you want to have it spelled out exactly as you want it to be written. But if you do have two last names or a hyphenated last name, and someone puts, you know, just one of those last names, I would include that on this list and make sure that the Board of Elections is aware that, oh, that could be a variation. It could be Jane Smith, it could be Jane Howard, or it could be Jane Smith Howard. You want to make sure that you have that variation spelled out. Again, this does not mean that the Board of Elections is going to change their view. It does not mean that they are going to turn over any votes because of this. But it does give them some kind of guide that they are going to be looking at that potentially could have them, as they're thinking about this, say, oh yeah, that's right, I remember seeing this on that list. I can see where that definitely is some variation of that name or a nickname or what have you. And it may stick in their mind as something that they will then accept in the long run. That letter then should be addressed to the Board of Elections. It should be signed by the candidate. It should be notarized just to make sure that it's official. And the Board of Elections should receive that notarized letter. Usually the advice is no later than 9 a.m. the Monday after the election, because they're going to start reviewing those write-ins. They're going to start certifying those votes. And you want to make sure that that letter is in their hands ahead of time, so that they can consider that when they're looking at these names. Again, we recommend try to get that letter to them as early as possible. As soon as the election's over, the next day, have it into that office, so that they know as they start to review these write-ins, whatever day they designate as the day they're going to start to review those write-ins, they have that information in their hands. So it's important to have that guide. Again, we put the note. This does not guarantee the Board of Elections will accept those variations, but it does mean that they'll at least have it in their heads that they're thinking about, okay, this could be a potential change to a name, or this could be a potential misspelling that we hadn't thought about, but here it is. So yeah, we should probably consider that. We then tell you, be prepared to run. Because the other side of this is, if you're running for a seat that has a challenger on the other side of the ticket, but not on the Democratic side, you're running to be a write-in on the Democratic side, be ready to run, because that means you're going to have to run an actual campaign against that individual into November. Also, be ready to run even if there's no one else running, even if there's no one else on the ballot on either side. Be ready to run, because there's the potential that someone's going to be running a write-in campaign on the other side as well. And by the end of the day, on primary day, there may be two candidates in a spot where there were none at the beginning of the day. So be ready to run a full election if you're running a write-in campaign. Don't expect that you are going to be the only one. If you are, fantastic. That means that more than likely you're probably going to be the winner, unless the other side decides to try to run a write-in on election day. That's a whole other process, and that's a lot more difficult to win in the general in November. But again, from a party standpoint, from a candidate standpoint, be ready to run and run a full campaign if you win that write-in vote. Okay. That's basically all the information that I had tonight. If you have additional questions, please put them in the chat. As I mentioned earlier, we'd be happy to answer any more questions that you might have. My contact information is here. If it's a question that I can't answer, I will certainly reach out to our state party. There's a lot of experts there regarding this. We can reach out to county boards of elections. The other thing that we just mentioned is to, definitely connect with your board of elections to see if there's anything weird that they do in their process. They should all be doing the same thing when it comes to write-in votes, but we know that every county is different. Every board of elections is a different makeup from every other county that's out there, and that it definitely would help if you're reaching out ahead of time just to see if they have any input on write-in campaigns as well. But certainly, if you have questions after tonight about a write-in campaign, my email address is here, my cell number is here. I'd be happy to answer questions for you. And like I said, if I can't find them, be happy to forward them on to others. So I will give one more call. Any other questions for tonight? Okay. Seeing none. Um, uh, so I believe it's the always good to check in with your Dem party. Yeah, your county committee, absolutely. Again, that's the other side of it is communicate with your county party, because again, they might be aware that somebody else is running a write-in for that same campaign as well, and they can provide that information. But there's certainly a ton of resources that your county party can provide in the way of walk lists, in the way of potential volunteers on election day that can help out. There's a lot of resources there. So yeah, thank you for that as well. Okay, so as I said when we started, we will send out a link of the recording for this. Probably maybe yet tonight, definitely tomorrow at the latest, to everybody that registered. And if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, thank you everyone for joining, and we will wish you the best of luck in your campaigns, and hopefully we will see you as victorious write-in candidates after the May primary. Thanks a lot.